The following video is an analysis of the television programme Catterick. Footage from that programme will be used in order to illustrate parts of said analysis and will also be presented for critical dissection. This video will also spoil the entirety of Catterick, but I'm guessing you haven't seen it because no one knows this programme even exists except for me, the people who actually made the programme, and a smattering of other weirdos who have seen this. In episode 1, and keep watching. The 1990s and 2000s were a time of great experimentation for British television, the likes of which we are unlikely to ever see again, and I'll be the first to admit that not all experiments are going to work out.
I know a man who is shit! That man is me!
But without experiments, we cannot innovate. Sometimes you've got to say yes to the idea that sounds terrible. Hey, let's go really dark and poignant for the last episode of our historical comedy fast programme. Hey, let's put Idris Elba in a trench coat and tell him he's Humphrey Bogart. He'll figure out the rest just as long as we keep the cameras rolling. Hey, let's take two blokes known for making mostly incomprehensible gibberish and put it out on Friday nights when everyone's crawling back in from the pub or have left their brains in a field in England after a long night of... Blimey, what rave bands were popular in the early 90s? The Shaman? A guy called Gerald? Morrissey? I don't know, I was negative 3. Trying new things has to happen, no matter how much the BBC would love to rely on the football and endless bastard fishing programmes. Sometimes, though, you don't realise gold while it's sitting on your lap, probably because it has a scene like this in it. Okay, lesson learned, old boy. Don't lead in with the bloke shitting himself. People might not take your clever video essay seriously. Inspiration can come from the strangest places, and really good inspiration practically requires the strangest people. And it's two very strange people that we're going to be talking about today. I'd like to, if you'd allow me, introduce a little comedy programme. A mere 6 half hours that I think is a forgotten classic from an unlikely source. And I think it has a little more to it than just being wacky comedy for zany funsters and students. But before we get there, I think it's important to set the scene. Let me take you back to the tail end of the 1980s. There's revolution in the air. The Cold War is officially over, and every politician in the United Kingdom is looking at the Prime Minister and seeing a succulent roast pig with an apple in its mouth, like in the cartoons. UK media has been morphing for quite some time. Sure, you can rely on Coronation Street or Cannon and Ball to bring in the ratings, but things have been getting more and more anarchic since the mid-80s. Everyone knows The Young Ones and The Comic Strip Presents, and you do know those, don't you? I'm going to presume that you do. While these shows may seem tame by modern standards, in the 80s, this...
Gordon Walters! That's an atom bomb.
...was the equivalent of this.
Now it's time for Attack DeMarco!
Television was playing catch-up to the surrealist, bombastic style of comedy that was already present in the comedy clubs across the country. Of course, England being England, London comes first, and then all the crinkly bits around the edges get to have a turn, with much less money the further out you go. Sorry, chums, but the Oxbridge set have to decide if something's funny first before we can laugh at it. It's how the Pythons did things, and by golly, it's how we're always going to do things, don't you know? God save the Queen! In the London comedy clubs, a fellow was plying his gags by the name of Jim Moir. Jim's show was mayhem, with plenty of audience participation, and was fundamentally a send-up of cheesy crooner cabarets and variety shows that were very common during the 70s. Jim's character at the beginning would change his name every show, but eventually he would settle on the name Vic Reeves, a jumped-up, self-important light entertainer specifically from the north of England, so that Jim could use his regional frame of reference for comedic value. But then call it kismet, because during one of Vic Reeves' performances, a solicitor named Bob Mortimer happened to be in the audience. Vic brings him on stage, Bob proves to be just as funny as Vic, and a partnership forms stronger than steel. Or at least, that's the story. Each telling varies the details. While there are many reports of an amazing first night where Bob is plucked from the hoi polloi by chance, there's also a telling of this tale that suggests Bob just went to a show one night, liked it, walked up to Jim afterwards, and the two began writing material almost immediately after. The latter sounds much more likely, but the other's more fun, so we'll go with the first one, because that means God himself wanted talc and turnips to happen. Checkmate, atheists. Reeves and Mortimer's antics got the attention of Channel 4, which is the fourth television channel, and eventually Vic Reeves' big night out turned up on telly. Channel 4 knew not to meddle in the madness and allowed Vic and Bob to bring the nigh schizophrenic intensity of their stage show to the screen. Of course, that one-to-one audience participation aspect was somewhat diluted, even with a live studio audience, which makes a lot of their sketches, usually built around just freaking out regular people, come across as random access humour, to quote a modern philosopher. Despite this, Vic and Bob gained a cult following, but also received some ire, with their apparently quirky madcap style being seen as childish, or even worse, studentish, their over-reliance on catchphrases not helping their case.
You wouldn't let it lie, would you?
Granted, these can certainly be annoying, especially when recited ad nauseum by people who think repetition and imitation are replacements for having a sense of humour. But I think what was lost on some people was the fact that Vic Reeves was supposed to be a parody. That Northern England's most popular light entertainer cover was, in my opinion, supposed to lambast the swarm of talentless, hokey half-comics that were everywhere at the time. There's a programme called Filthy Rich and Catflap by the same minds behind The Young Ones that took aim at the same thing in a more direct way, indicating that the emerging comedy school took particular umbrage with this style of safe humour. Naysayers aside, Vic and Bob did attract enough of a fan base to make both Channel 4 and the BBC vie for their affection. The duo attempted to create a surreal sitcom known as The Weekenders for Channel 4, but when the pilot didn't pick up, they turned their coats and joined Auntie Beeb. These allegiances mean absolutely nothing these days, like the console wars or religion, so feel free to forget everything I just said. You're welcome. Vic and Bob had their main success in Shooting Stars, a more on-the-nose parody of game shows where the points mean nothing, the questions are asinine, and they met a giant baby who plays the drums. The giant baby is an important character in this video. You are not allowed to forget the giant baby. You're welcome. More important to our needs, though, is their semi-sketch show, The Smell of Reeves and Mortimer. This show was closer in nature to Vic Reeves' Big Night Out. It had their wacky characters, Vic Reeves crooning, and Vic's strange art. More Shooting Stars carried them into the new millennium, and after Smell, Reeves and Mortimer made Bang Bang, It's Reeves and Mortimer. This show was very similar to Smell, but perhaps more streamlined, having even more of a sketch show feel than their previous output. This being said, characters Vic and Bob create tend to pop up repeatedly throughout their different works. English folk singers Mulligan and O'Hare first crop up in Smell, but appear irregularly in Shooting Stars even into the 2000s. Greg Mitchell, the gorgeous sandy-coloured Labrador, hails from Big Night Out, but makes a special appearance towards the end of Smell. Vic and Bob don't let a good character fall to the wayside. Bang Bang features two key recurring segments that are notable. Firstly, and less importantly, there's Tom Fun and Derek. Tom Fun is a weird guy who seems to think he's a children's entertainer, but is actually just a homeless guy. Think Sir Digby Chicken Caesars from Mitchell and Webb, but even more delusional. Tom Fun first pops up at the end of Smell for a single sketch, but in Bang Bang he's followed around by Derek, a similarly homeless man who seems barely functional. The other sketch that sticks out from the pack is The Club, a fly-on-the-wall spoof documentary of a rubbish nightclub owned by the Barron brothers. The Club actually has a narrative, unlike most of the rest of their works, and each week the trials and tribulations of the staff of Barron's nightclub would be expanded upon. Vic Reeves claimed that the Club's documentary style inspired The Office, but I'm not sure of the veracity of that. I know the Day-to-Day had The Bureau, but that was more of a gag on soap operas. I don't know, but if it's true, that means the American comedy Goliath that is The Office owes its existence to scenes like this.
Tonight is erotic night, and I've changed various bits of the decor to give them an erotic ambience. Have a look at this. I've solid-taped knickers onto the bottom of the chairs.
Workers at the nightclub include two bouncers, Chris and Carl Palmer, and American compere Kinky John Fowler. These characters eventually work themselves up into a mayhem of a night, which involves Kinky John waving a gun around and maybe the death of Les Dennis. The Club is distinctly the best bit of Bang Bang, even overlooking Bob Mortimer's bizarre Asian accent as one of the Barron brothers.
If fortune or family!
Family fortune!
Les Dennis for fortune or family!
Don't worry, it's not yellow face, it's just yellow voice. The Barrons are supposed to be estranged from birth. We're going to be alright, lads, I swear. The Club does gradually amp up its drama, while keeping the wacky Reeves and Mortimer style, showing us that if the boys can hang their madcap hijinks over a plot, those reservations people have about the lol random type jokes Vic and Bob are known for can be assuaged, and by 2004, they get their chance to try. Catterick is a single 6-episode series that was released on BBC Three. This might have been seen as a step down, considering their previous work had been broadcast on the major channels, but consider this. 1. Catterick would later be rerun on BBC Two, and 2. BBC Three didn't exist back then. I'm sure this is a technicality. Catterick revolves around the Palmer brothers, Chris and Carl. While they may look similar to their club selves, they are no longer nightclub bouncers. Carl is returning to his hometown after a stint in the army, looking for the son he left behind with his ex-wife at Catterick Garrison. And Chris has been... surviving. Chris meets up with his brother at the train station and the two head to their old pub across the road from a car showroom. A car showroom that just happens to be being robbed by Reece Shearsmith. People know who Reece Shearsmith is, don't they? YouTube keeps showing me fan edits of him on Taskmaster. Some of you people are very strange. Anyway, Chris and Carl decide to head to the Mermaid Hotel, somewhere the childlike Chris has always dreamed of staying, and to get there, they steal a car. From the car showroom. From Reece Shearsmith. A Reece Shearsmith who just did this. Chris and Carl make it to the hotel and meet the staff. The tyrannical owner Roy Oates, played by the giant baby I warned you about, put upon cynical receptionist Tess, who also happens to be Roy's long-suffering girlfriend, and cheerful half-wit Mark, who gets bullied by his boss. While Chris and Carl enjoy a luxury 4-crown hotel,
and a fifth one expected,
Reece Shearsmith, his character's called Tony, hunts the brothers down for the money in the car they stole rather than the car itself, all while the local police investigate the shooting, led by the American Eagle, D.I. Fowler.
my God.
Back at the Mermaid, Chris starts to make the very Reeves and Mortimer-ish moves on Tess, raising the ire of Roy Oates, who gets all protective, and this is where he shits himself. Why did I show that twice? What on earth am I playing at? Incensed, Roy tells Carl to get out in the morning, but before they can, Tony sneaks in and holds the Palmer brothers at gunpoint. Luckily, Mark surprises Tony with a Hoover. Mark and the Palmers then leg it, and Mark steals from the till as they go, with all havoc breaking loose. Tony then teams up with an unknowing Roy and a reluctant Tess after ransacking Roy's safe himself, obtaining a strange yellow jar Roy seems particularly covetous over, and the chase begins with D.I. Fowler and his Constable Webster in hot pursuit. Chris, Carl and Mark hole up in a gooseberry farm, trying to figure out what to do with all the money they currently have, electing to head to a garden centre where Carl's son is supposed to have worked. Bear in mind, these are very vague notes. I'm skipping over a lot of nuance, like this bloke here.
How old are you? What is your name? Are you an American actor?
Do I like you?
You remember him, it's Derek from the Tom Fun Bang Bang things, you know? That's really all he's really here for. He pops up a couple of times, but doesn't really do much. I think that's what we call in the business a misdirect. Roy, Tony and Tess get boxed in by Fowler, and this gets Webster killed, resulting in this weirdly tender moment between Fowler and him. He gets buried by the roadside with a makeshift cross. Tess flees in the chaos and meets up with Chris, Carl and Mark, and they all head off to the garden centre together, with Tony close behind and Roy and Fowler close behind him, with Roy more desperate to get his jar back than anything else. Oh, yes, the jar holds his penis, by the way. It's best to rip the plaster off that sooner rather than later. Roy's going to tell various stories about how he was relieved of his little Roy, and we never get a straight answer. It shocks Fowler, though.
My God!
The crew reach the garden centre, and Chris asks about his son, getting told by, oh look, it's Mark Gatiss, getting told that his son still lives up at the Catterick Garrison. So if Chris just went straight there anyway and talked to his ex-wife, all this could have been avoided. Tess gets sent off with the dosh, fleeing to a place she owns nearby, and Tony arrives to menace Chris, Carl and Mark. Tony, however, is interrupted from turning our heroes into decorative trellises by Fowler and Roy, but that doesn't go particularly well for them. A surprisingly tense standoff happens where Carl attempts to use his army knowledge to fashion a makeshift bomb out of gardening supplies while hiding from Tony stalking the aisles. That also doesn't go very well. Fortunately, one of the Palmer's friends from the pub successfully traps Tony's head in a watering can, which allows the gang to flee again into the wilderness. We get a bit of quiet time, where Roy's jar gets smashed, with both a handless Roy and Carl winding up at Tess's place in the woods, with Carl and Tess getting a moment hinting at their burgeoning romance. Chris and Mark hole up in a trailer, and Tony stalks the moors, growing increasingly more insane until finally he winds up at their trailer and begins tormenting the baby men. We see Tess fleeing with the money, seemingly intending to flee the country, and just before Tony hangs Chris and Mark, Carl arrives in the nick of time, freeing his friends and burning Tony in the trailer, saving all their lives. Chris, Carl and Mark make their way to Catterick Garrison to find Carl's son, but Carl isn't able to bring himself to see him, nerves getting the better of him. So Chris goes to see Carl's ex-wife. And then we discover that Tony was Carl's son. Chris cannot bring himself to tell Carl what happened, making up a story of his son being a successful businessman. It's a rather nasty gut punch on what was a wacky, surreal ride. We do get to see Tess come back, and she and Carl reconnects, and both Fowler and Roy survive, though Roy's missing more of himself than he was before, but yeah, that's it. So, all this waffle's all well and good, but you're probably wondering why on earth I'm talking about this seemingly comedic with a little bit of a dark twist series. Well, and this might sound insane, but I think it's trying to say something. Between all the
Spatchcock.
and the
Fanny fresh.
Catterick has a point. I think. Listen, I might have gone crazy, but just hear me out. I swear I'm sane. I'm not. Catterick isn't as stupid as it appears. It does some clever little bits that suggests it's more than just an extended Vic and Bob sketch. Sure, most of it is jokes, but some of those jokes have a cleverer setup than others. At one point, Tony sneaks into Chris's house, searching for the duo, and what we see of Chris's house is very strange. Now, Chris is a strange man. He sits in the dark, his house number is painted on his window. He's a very, very odd man, but he's also presented as being mostly harmless, kind of stuck in arrested development. While Tony is skulking through Chris's house, he gets accosted by a turkey. There's a lot of weird random shit in Catterick, and this turkey seems to be just one more eccentric wrinkle in the tale. But then, later on, we get a moment where Chris is asked about what he'll do with the money they've nicked, and he reveals he has a passion for
Luxury pets.
with his definition of luxury being suspect.
A soft white poodle, a lobster, a venison, and a silkworm. No, 2 silkworms. I intend to wear a lot of luxury gowns.
We then get a similar scene, where Chris reveals how lonely he has been while Carl has been off in the army. It's a comedy scene as everyone's eating sour gooseberries, but suddenly this weird, hairy buffoon man has a backstory and motivations that remain consistent throughout all 6 episodes. Carl's search for his son is also treated with genuine sincerity. He clearly feels remorse over not being a part of his life, and his willingness to head off to the garden centre while being tracked by a homicidal Tony proves it. But I think there might be a little more to Carl's desire to find his son than simply being absent, especially as the ending shows that his absence has resulted in a murderer with mummy issues. You see, I think a major theme of Catterick is lies and secrets. Every major character has a significant moment where lying is an important part of their plotline. Roy Oates constantly lies about how he lost his little fella, and even starts lying about how he lost his hand, despite the fact that we see what happened. To Roy, this seems to be a compulsion due to pride. Any attempt to threaten his authority over his hotel or his manhood is met with indignation, as we can see in this scene where he fights Derek from those Tom Fun sketches. That was a misdirect on a misdirect. I am the smartest man on this website. Tony is constantly lying to his mother about what he does for a living. He lies about the theft, pretends to be working at a shrimp potting centre to explain where he's going on his hunt for Chris and Carl, and when he's going truly insane, he starts mustering to himself about what excuse he's going to give his mother for why he's late home. What Tess is lying about is an important part of the later half of the series. Is she taking the money for herself? Does she flee the country then have second thoughts about returning for Chris in the end? Either way, she's always sneaking off somewhere, though I will admit, most of the time, that's the right move to get away from these nutters. Mark is hiding a big secret about causing a horrible boat crash at last year's flotilla. A captain saw a bare-chested Mark, thought he was a mermaid, and caused the aquatic equivalent of a pileup while incensed with lust. Roy has proof of this incident, and it's this blackmail that forces Mark into a position of servitude during the early part of the series. It's wacky, sure, but it's treated as a terrible act that resulted in a couple of deaths, No wonder he's distraught about it. I personally blame the lusty captain, but, he's a right to feel a little bit guilty. D.I. Fowler appears to be a straight-shooting American cop, but his tall tales stretch belief, and at one point he and Webster drop a couple of E's and have a mini-rave in Fowler's car, so he's not the shining example of Yankee justice that he claims to be after all. My God! I think this is all best typified by a side character. The bloke who helps Chris, Carl and Mark escape Tony at the garden centre. Ian. Ian is a conspiracy theorist. Every slight oddity in his life is an example of a wider plot against him. The job centre suggests that he, a labourer, tries interviewing as a drummer for a Caribbean rock funk band. It can't be an administrative error, it must be some kind of sinister ruse by the government. The postman takes a shit on his driveway. Not some maniac defiling the pavement, he must be planting government listening devices to spy on him. But while Ian is complaining of being a targeted individual before it was cool, he's also complaining about his wife, mainly about how cold she is. No, not frigid or icy or distant, like physically cold. Ian pays out of pocket trying to keep his wife warm, up to and including injecting her with cavity wall insulation, but it just won't take. Mrs. Ian stays as chilly as hell. You know, the depiction of hell from the Divine Comedy, where it's a frozen lake that the devil is waist deep in. Yeah, you remember, from the Sopranos video. Pay attention. Turns out Mrs. Ian is, in fact, dead. You might have even guessed that, but Ian simply couldn't figure it out. Even when he's arrested at the end for filling his dead wife with cavity wall insulation, he doesn't quite believe it, even after attending her funeral. Ian believes in a web of secrets being kept from him, while lying to himself about his wife. I think this is very intentional. We frequently go back to Ian, even when the action should logically have taken us away from him, and he's the one who turns up at Catterick Garrison to take the boys back to reality after Carl fails to find his son. But you're probably noticing I've not brought up Chris and Carl, because I think Chris and Carl's relationship with the truth is the most interesting. Chris, for starters, is a fascinating entity. When Carl meets Chris at the train station right at the beginning, Chris brings flowers for Carl in a kind of sweet Lenny and the Rabbits kind of way, but upon seeing Carl, Chris immediately drops them in a bin. Carl sees this and asks if they were for him, and Chris tries to play it cool, but Chris is utterly unable to tell a lie convincingly. Carl sees right through him, and Chris appears embarrassed. Throughout the rest of the series, Chris will often blurt out whatever is on his mind, even when he knows he shouldn't. He brings up ripping up a George Clooney poster to Carl, almost apropos to nothing, which is treated as a grave insult to the nice Mr. Clooney. This is kind of a reverse of how Chris acted back in the club sketches from Bang Bang. Chris tells tall tales in his and Carl's bits to camera, and no matter how obviously nonsense they are, and no matter how much Carl points out that they're rubbish, Chris will doggedly and unwaveringly assert that what he's saying is true, moving the goalposts as and when needed. But then there's that final secret, that Tony, the maniac Carl burnt alive in a caravan, was Carl's son. Chris can't bring himself to tell Carl, and instead of challenging Chris and seeing through it, Carl takes Chris's story as the truth. An unwanted truth, but the truth nonetheless, leaving Chris the only person who knows actually what happened on the 3 days heading to Catterick. And what about Carl? The only lie he seems to tell is one really obvious one about phoning George Clooney to tell off Chris about ripping his poster. Oh, and maybe the little scheme he and Chris pull to get the car full of money in the first place. But according to Chris, this is a dodge the two have performed frequently in the past in order to get wheels. He's an inveterate liar, actually, now I come to think of it, but moving on. Hold on, wait a second. You see, Carl claims he's been in the army all this time, seconded to Cyprus, one of the few places the British Empire still technically lays claim to. God save the Queen and all who sail in her, or whatever. But when he's talking about his time in the army, Carl's stories don't seem to add up. He's vague when talking to the boys in the pub in episode 1.
Cyprus? Oh, right, Cyprus, yeah. It was hot, and sweaty.
His old army tricks seem to be jokes to impress Tess more than anything, and most notably, his improvised bomb in the garden centre is actually a dud inspired by the A-Team. Carl has no medals, no uniform, nothing that would actually suggest he's been in the army. What's he been doing otherwise? No idea. Maybe dancing lessons. Maybe he's just been trying to make distance from his ex-wife. There's a lot of tension there. He certainly doesn't want to go back to see her. Hell, when the boys are wandering around in the woods, Chris seems to have a greater knowledge of how to survive in the wilderness than Carl does, though it does seem to be his special interest. Maybe Carl's lie is supposed to be that initial one, the car robbery that gets him into this mess, but seeing as not even the police seem to care about the car after a certain point, I don't think that's the case. I just think there's something suspicious about what we're being shown, and it would also tie on to the foreshadowing as well. Ah yes, the foreshadowing. Tony being Carl's son is foreshadowed a lot, in a number of rather cool and subtle ways. When Tony is sneaking around Chris's house, he finds that torn George Clooney poster and reacts in a disgusted way, similar to how Carl does. The very first cut of the programme cuts from Carl staring out of a window to Tony staring out of a window, mirroring his hand motions. Even in that final confrontation in the caravan, Tony does a star dive off the roof, and then Carl does one exactly the same. If Carl has been lying to his family about his job for the past 20 years, then when Tony lies to his mum about getting a job, then he's really following in his father's footsteps, making Chris's lie at the end to Carl about the true whereabouts of Tony even more poignant. I could be stark raving mad. I could be jumping at shadows. I could also point out these crows that first appear right at the beginning, owned by this weird fellow sitting across from Carl on the train. From then on, we get a couple of shots of random crows, only for a crow to get stuck in Tony's car, slowing him down. Only for a crow to attack Tony after the garden centre, slowing him down. Running gag or symbolism? That's for you to judge. Alright, enough. Let's wrap this video up. One more section, then I'll tie everything up in a nice bow, and then we can all go home for tea. Let's keep this short and sweet. Post Catterick, Vic and Bob. Let's go. Shooting stars. Vic and Bob keep doing it right up until 2011. Same wacky antics, occasionally an old character comes back for a cameo, but the world ain't moving right along. House of Fools, Vic and Bob's next major project. It's a parody of cheesy sitcoms. A genuinely great comedy, but you have to kind of know the source material to find it funny. Has Matt Berry in it, has Morgana in it, worth a watch. Randall and Hopkirk deceased. Hard one to gorge, stars Vic and Bob, but is mostly helmed by Charlie Higson, who plays the pub owner in Catterick. A technical remake of the old 60s BBC series in format, but not episodes. Interesting, but not really Vic and Bob's brainchild. But lots of modern Doctor Who alumni, including Murray Gold as composer. You know, the that bloke. Then it's a smattering of experiments, oddities and failures. Lucky Sexy Winners was an attempt to port Shooting Stars over to Channel 4. One pilot, never picked up. There's these weird adverts for Foster's beer scattered around old YouTube. Quality material, actually. Highly recommended. The Freerunners, Ghost Hunters and sing-along song sketches. Really good. Actually, these are cheap and cheerful ways to figure out if Vic and Bob are right for you, if you don't mind pixels the size of buses. After that, not much has come from this duo. In the 90s, Vic and Bob were on top of the comedy world, and now no one really gives them the time of day that they deserve. Jim Moir has had some health problems in recent years and has become more of a painter and presenter these days. He sells his strange art and keeps something of the menu alive. Bob Mortimer, on the other hand, is seemingly everywhere, despite having a heart attack or two. He can always be relied upon to freak out uptight celebrities on panel shows, but his current big thing is his fishing programme with other veteran UK comedian Paul Whitehouse. Very comfy viewing. Two blokes being mates trying to make each other laugh. Solid second monitor content that you can watch with your nan. I'm sure I'm missing the odd pilot here and there. Chris, Carl and D.I. Fowler do make special appearances in a documentary on Steve Coogan, but I don't think it's canon to Catterick. I don't think any of this is canon to anything, actually. There is no canon, just emotions like the sparrow's sorrow or the bin man's giddiness. I've really just done this roundup to finish things off and to show what an oddity Catterick is in Vic and Bob's oeuvre. Between the sketch shows and the game shows, Catterick sticks out like a sore thumb, which makes it kind of special. There's something quite like it, even from the creators themselves. Even if my madcap theory crafting is all bunkum, that is, at least, worth something. A unique, surreal journey. We won't see its like again, so take the trip to Catterick and see if you can pick up some gooseberries. I promise you, you won't regret it. I have a confession to make. I've brought you all here on false pretenses. This is not a video essay, nor is it a video history. It's a cry for help. Not that kind of cry for help, like a call to arms. That's a better. Not I'm fine. I know I might not seem fine, but I'm fine, officer, I'm fine, I swear. That bit in the middle of the video where I was talking about secrets and lies, I ended it by saying maybe it is and maybe it isn't, in that YouTuber way of false humility. You know, well, you could think otherwise, but, well, I've just shown you all the evidence, so I'm probably right because I made the video about it, fnar, fnar, fnar. That humility, on my part, isn't actually false or humility. I honestly don't know if I've cracked the code or if I've gone totally bananas. Catterick could just be some lol random human with enough trailheads to confuse the hunting dogs, but I swear to God I think I've found something. Maybe it's just a little thing, like a single Roman coin in a field in England, but you still put those coins in the museums, don't you? Please, if you have any way of watching Catterick, I know it's hard to find, but I implore you, tell me if I'm crazy. I mean, art is supposed to be half what you bring to it, so my conclusions about lying and secrets being a theme have merit on a purely subconscious level, I think. If, by some small chance, you have seen Catterick or have the ability to watch Catterick in any capacity, do so. Then get back here and call me a drooling buffoon, who would be one of those guys in Plato's cave clapping at the shadows on the wall. Or you could call me an unparalleled genius who discovered a philosophical and cultural treatise of the post-war on terror world. No in between. I'm one or the other. I can't be both or somewhere in the middle. I'm no fence-sitting, namby-pamby centrist. My God!
Look at him now. He's got the mind of a 6-year-old, but the sexual appetite of a 17-year-old. Spends all day jerking off watching the Powerpuff Girls.